Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
Late nights at hotels are normally quiet times. At most, a single person operating the hotel will only have a few late night check-ins, perhaps deal with some drunks returning, and make some early wake-up calls. But for hotels along the northern section of the I-65 highway in the early 1990s, things were a bit tense after a string of robberies had taken place. Then, on March 3, 1989, things would take a turn for the worse, with not one but two murders occurring that night at separate hotels. This murder spree would bring a killer who had been active for at least 2 years prior into the public and give him a name: the I-65 Killer.
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one,
The death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
Today, some 30 years in the making, 4 families can begin the healing process after their loved ones were victimized by the I-65 killer. He's also known as the Days Inn killer.
That's right. Our Nikki Dementri explains tonight the break in the cold case that led to the man in this sketch being identified.
After more than 30 years, the identity of the I-65 killer is no longer a mystery. Police say that man is Harry Edward Greenwell. He died of cancer in 2013.
The match was 99.9999% positive.
The use of investigative genealogy is behind the match.
Investigative genealogy is the use of DNA analysis in combination with traditional genealogy research and historical records.
Law enforcement agencies here today say they are continuing investigations into several other cases that may be connected to Greenwell. In Indianapolis, Nikki Dementri, WRTV.
We'll return to Greenwell later, but first, let's look at the crimes. With the benefit of hindsight, we can start chronologically, though it would take many years for all of these murders to be pieced together. Not linked until 2010 via DNA, the first known killing occurred in Elizabethtown, Kentucky on February 20th, 1987. Newly engaged 41-year-old Vicki Heath clocked in for a night shift at the Super 8 Hotel in Elizabethtown, a small town along the I-65 highway south of Louisville. The hotel manager said goodbye to Vicki at 11 p.m. 7.5 hours later, police received a call to the hotel. Responding officers found the lobby ransacked as if a fight had took place and the clerk missing. It was roughly 1 hour later when she would be found. In the mud behind this very dumpster lay the body of Vicki Heath.
Raped her and shot her, dumping her body behind a dumpster. Detectives responded early and stayed late, collecting evidence.
Anything that we think 2 or 3 weeks down the road or a year down the road that we might need.
A single pair of footprints led from the crime scene to the next door parking lot that was used by truckers to pull over and sleep. Her killer had robbed, raped, and then shot her twice in the head. Lois Wright worked weekends at the Colonial Inn located in Rockford, Illinois, now a Motel 6. It was December 18th, 1988 when her husband became concerned. Normally, Lois would phone him to check in and let him know if she would be off at her usual time at 8 a.m. It was after 6 a.m. when he decided to call the hotel. She answered after a second phone call and apologized. She had gotten busy and said come at the usual time. About an hour later, the first guest entered the lobby to check out and found no one around. After another guest entered, they began to look around and found Lois's body lying face down on the carpet. She had been shot in the chest. Like Vicki Heath's murder, police were operating under the assumption that it was a robbery gone wrong. Less than 2 weeks later, that would all change. It was December 31st when 34-year-old James Walton began his night shift at the Envoy Inn off I-71 in Florence, Kentucky. At 6:20 a.m., a guest came down to get a cup of coffee. He would later report seeing a small woman with dark hair speaking to James, along with a strange-acting man described as a heavy-built, 6'1" Grizzly Adams type who was staring at him. As soon as he returned to his room, a loud noise occurred which caused other guests to come out of their rooms thinking someone had set off firecrackers. But it wasn't firecrackers. James Walton had been taken to the parking lot behind the Envoy and shot 3 times. These 2 cases would be linked via ammunition to each other, but as of yet have not been officially connected to the I-65 killer. Meanwhile, almost exactly 3 months later, on March 2nd, 1989, Margaret Gill began her shift at the Merrillville Days Inn. The 24-year-old college student liked the night shift because it was quiet, and that night she was going to work on finishing planning her father's 51st birthday party that was to take place the next day. Despite being located just south of Gary, Indiana, which 5 years later would earn the glorious title of murder capital of the world, Merrillville was considered a safe area. Even with the robberies over the past few years, no extra safety measures were taken besides a phone call to the manager each morning at 5 a.m. However, no such call came on March 3rd, which made General Manager Betty Pierce worry. She called police who arrived around 6 a.m. to find impatient customers waiting outside the lobby. Upon entering, the cash register is found to have been pried open. Searching the rest of the hotel, police entered the second story of the West Wing, which was not in use during the winter months. Here, next to the fire escape at the end of the hall, was the nude body of Margaret. Her clothes were folded neatly beside her. She had been raped and shot twice in the head.
It was in the second-floor hallway of this unoccupied wing of the Merrillville Days Inn where the first victim was found. Fellow employees called police around 2:30 this morning when Gill couldn't be reached at her front desk.
I can tell you she was an exceptionally very good person. She was a loyal employee, but that's all that I can say.
Gill's parents say they were always worried about their daughter working overnights, but said they never really thought anyone would hurt her.
Not to Peggy. Not because I don't think she had an enemy in the world.
That's right.
I mean, you had to know her. She just didn't.
You can't bring someone back to as lost she is. It's an empty spot.
I hope they catch whoever it was before they do it to somebody else. You know, before they do it to somebody else.
Just hours later, police learned an almost exact same crime had occurred 52 miles away in Remington, Indiana. 34-year-old Jean Gilbert was a recently divorced mother of 2. She had just gone back to school and had a second job as the overnight clerk at the Remington Days Inn. Last used as a Sunset Inn, this motel closed for COVID and now sits vacant. The night of the murders was cold and windy, just like it is now when a man entered the lobby and rushed to attack Jean. Like in Merrillville, he pried the cash register open before forcing the terrified girl out a less visible side door and into his car. Less than 2 hours later, guests at the Days Inn called police stating they could not check out from the hotel as no one was there. Just minutes later, a school bus driving along the rural county road 150 West reported a body. This area is about 19 miles south of Remington. It is here, in a ditch, the naked body of Jean was found. She had been shot 3 times.
Police found the body of the second Days Inn clerk near I-65 and Route 24 near Rensselaer. They say 33-year-old Jean Gilbert was dumped here in a ditch after being abducted from the Remington Days Inn she worked at 18 miles north on I-65.
We'll have a plane up shortly to fly over and take some aerials. The troopers now are walking the ditch.
Yeah, obviously dealing with a person who is pretty cold-blooded, I would say, twice in one night.
Though the two killings were initially reported as unrelated, the FBI entered the investigation and DNA evidence conclusively linked to these two murders. Somewhere, a madman was prowling the I-65 highway. Ten months later, on January 2nd, 1990, at 5 a.m., the next attack occurred. A man claiming to be a trucker entered the lobby of the Columbus Days Inn and asked the clerk if she knew any places to eat that were open. Less than 20 minutes later, he returned carrying a cup of coffee and asked if she could make change to get some soda. Upon opening the register, the woman was blinded as the hot coffee was thrown into her face. After robbing her, he forced her out into the north-south hallway and to the south end of the hall into the small vestibule that led to the parking lot. After raping her, the man ordered her to begin walking across the parking lot and up the embankment into the mucky water. She kept walking past these woods to this area where these new buildings are, certain the man was behind her and ready to shoot. Eventually, though, she realized she was alone. DNA was collected and would match that in the murders of Gill and Gilbert. The anonymous victim would go on to provide the composite sketch that until 2022 was the only image we had of the I-65 killer. Now, let's take a look at this one and the one from the Florence, Kentucky attack on James Walton. The following year, two more similar attacks would occur. One proven not linked, and another that would not be linked until 2013 via DNA. First is the unrelated but still unsolved murder of 36-year-old Victoria Harshman. Times were not going well for Vicky. In 1989, her oldest child had died of a car crash and she was currently going through a divorce. To make matters worse, she had just found out she was pregnant. She worked nights at the Lebanon, Indiana Holiday Inn Holidome, which was demolished in 2014 but abandoned for some time, as you can see in these photos. It was 11 p.m. September 19th when Vicky began her shift, and an hour later her sister called her and the two spoke about her future. While Vicky knew it would be tough, she was excited. It was 2:30 a.m. the next morning when a police officer drove by and waved to Vicky. It was just 9 months prior the hotel had been the scene of a different crime. On January 16, 1991, Gerald Bivens, Ronald Chambers, and Scott Wiles broke into a guest room at the hotel, robbing the man and stealing his car after tying him up in the bathtub. The three men next stopped at the I-65 northbound rest stop north of Lebanon, Indiana, where they robbed Reverend William Radcliffe. Bivens forced the man into a bathroom stall and shot him in the head for no other reason than he wanted to know what it was like to kill. Meanwhile, on the night of September 19th, two men, presumably checking in, were seen at the counter by a paper boy about 2:45. 1 hour later, two truckers attempting to check out found the front desk splattered with blood. After stealing a golf putter from nearby, someone chased Victoria down the hallway and beat her until the putter broke. They then stabbed her to death with a pair of scissors. These similarities led the I-65 task force to investigate, but it was deemed unrelated. Police have stated that they know who the killer is, but do not have enough evidence to prove it. Supposedly, a female friend of Vicky's had been seen in the parking lot, and it is believed to have been a revenge killing. The final known attack is the 1991 robbery, rape, and stabbing of a clerk in Rochester, Minnesota. The woman survived and provided a description of her attacker that would be exactly like the Columbus victim. Until 2022, the public knew little to no suspects in the cases. The only one of note was Joseph Franco, who in 1992 abducted and raped a woman. Before he let her go, he carved I-65 into her chest. He was cleared of the murders through DNA evidence. Today, we know that Harry Edward Greenwell was the I-65 killer, so let's look at his history. Born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1944, Harry spent 30 years working on the Canadian Pacific Railway and enjoyed organic gardening, which he sold at the local farmers market. He was married and had 2 children. His obituary notes he was a generous and kind man liked by all. But obviously, this is not true. There was a dark side to Harry Greenwell. When he was just 15 years old, Greenwell and an ex-convict got into a chase with police after trying to sell cigarettes to a prison chain gang in Tennessee. After crashing, $1,200 of stolen musical instruments were found in the car as well. He was sentenced to a juvenile center and 2 years later escaped along with 2 other boys. They were caught in a stolen vehicle but were returned with no charges. At age 19, he was arrested for armed robbery and sentenced to 2 years jail time. Immediately after, he was arrested for sodomy. While in a holding cell at the courthouse, Harry busted down a window and jumped 2 stories to the ground. He was captured the following day and jailed. 4 years later, Greenwell was paroled and seems to have went straight for a while. He was married and moved to Wisconsin. After his first wife died in a house fire, he would marry again before returning to jail in 1982 for burglary in Iowa. Less than a year into sentencing, Greenwell would escape not once, but 2 times from jail. Amazingly, he was still released in December of that year. 3 years later, his second wife divorced him. This was 7 months before the first known murder of Vicky Heath. The next 2 years saw he and his ex-wife reconcile and break up several times, and on March 23, 1989, less than 3 weeks after his double homicide night, he was arrested for attempting to strangle his ex-wife. On April 18th, he gets 15 months probation for criminal trespassing. January 2nd, the next year, would be the Columbus assault. Then things go silent. This is the period Harry met his final wife and had 2 children of his own, as well as becoming a stepfather to her daughter. 1998 saw him arrested for drug possession, and just a few weeks later, police responded to the Greenwell home after his stepdaughter stabbed him. As she was a juvenile, little is known why, but police did discover a gun in Greenwell's possession, a felony for an ex-convict. Charges for this and violating his restraining order from his stepdaughter would be dropped the next month. What happened to that gun? Was it ever run for ballistics? One has to wonder if this could have solved the cases before Harry died of cancer in 2013. Police are still working on putting together the missing pieces of Harry Greenwell's life. In an interview, his wife said that while she was completely shocked by his murders, she stated she believed there could have been more victims out there. And until there's a way to definitively pinpoint all of Greenwell's movements, we may never know just exactly where the man known as the I-65 killer went.
Right now, detectives are working with local police departments up and down I-65 to find out if Harry Greenwell could be tied to even more murders. They're hopeful DNA evidence could provide the link in those cases as well.
Sometimes the answers do not come as quickly as we would like, but in the end, I am thankful that we are finally able to provide answers to questions that have plagued these victims and their families for so long.
You might be able to hide for a while, but we're going to find you, even if you're not here.
Maybe I don't have closure, but the peace in my life has been given to me.
But detectives say their work isn't done. They believe Greenwell, the I-65 killer, could be responsible for more murders, more assaults across the Midwest.